Hi, you're listening to UNS Talks, a podcast by the international architecture and design firm UNStudio. Hosted today by me, Lucie Pressl. In this episode, we're exploring human-centric design and architecture, a research-heavy field that examines how the built environment impacts human behavior and well-being. Today we have on the podcast Frans, a director here at UNStudio, who is leading the new office in Austin, Texas, and Benjamin, a teacher, consultant, and researcher in the field of neuroscience and psychology, who collaborates with our UNS Futures team. Frans and Ben, thank you for joining our episode today. Please introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Frans, as you said already, van Vuure, a Dutch national, living here in Amsterdam already for most of my life, heading for the US to start the office in Austin, an architect in education and practicing already for about 30 years, 30 plus years. And for me, architecture is a lifestyle. It's a way of living. And I think what we can mean for people as architects is so much, and so much still has been unexplored. And I think behavioral science is something that we bump into more, and we see really the benefit of shedding new light on how people actually perceive and experience architecture.
So I'm Benjamin Davey. I come from a background in psychology, and more recently I've been working a little bit in some neuroscience and cognition applications as well. And I've been applying this work to architecture, and I've had the pleasure of being involved in a couple of US-based projects, specifically one in Los Angeles and one in Austin, Texas. And it's been super interesting seeing how I can take a lot of these ideas from science and these methods and techniques that I'm sure we'll talk about as we go through today, and really find a way to apply them to this new field of architecture, which has always been something that's fascinated me, and that I've found incredibly interesting on a personal level. But it's been wonderful being able to apply this. So yeah, that's me.
Super cool. And before we go straight into the conversation, Ben, can you outline for us what cognitive experience design is?
Yes, I can. So you've probably heard of experience design before, or you also would have heard of user experience. And these are all fields, some of them related to architecture and design, some of them related to general design. But it's all about this general idea that you can, when you're designing something, you can approach it in a few different ways. And one way is to start by thinking about the experience that you want people to have when they are interacting with either your design or whatever it is. And by starting at this point of experience, you can really design intentionally to create the best possible outcome for the people who are going to be using your designs. And so the cognition part of cognitive experience design essentially takes this a little bit further by taking some cognitive principles that you may be familiar with, so sensation and perception, decision making, attention, all these principles that underlie human behavior, and tries to use what we know about these things to better understand experience, and then better understand how we can design for experience. So it's a bit of a fuzzy field in some ways, but essentially I think that's the basics of it.
And Frans, why is it so important to include this missing layer of cognitive experience design in architecture projects, especially in future projects that you are planning to work on?
Well, what we think at UNStudio is we always have to explore ways of making urban environment architecture better equipped with a human-centric approach. How can we create a more durable, sustainable, so you will, but especially a more healthy environment, more comfortable and safe, and utilizing the science of behavior, of perception, of what is conscious and what is unconscious, makes that we can better project kind of the sequence of how people move through a spatial environment. And by creating that notion of how people would perceive it, we can also make it more tailor-made to people. And that counts for groups of people as well as individuals. And we really think that apart from feeling comfortable or feeling safe, it also has to do with your focus? Are you more concentrated? Are you more relaxed? Can you take away stress, or can you enhance stress to make you more perceptive? We do that in the field of architecture urbanism until now more intuitive. We know that in philosophy and in certain practices there is more emphasis to it. But we really feel that it belongs to our day and age, in which people are much more conscious of what the built environment does to one another.
Super interesting. And Ben, from your experience as working as a consultant for UNStudio and also other companies, what is a piece of advice you would offer to architects that are designing our future cities?
Okay, I think I think one of the key things is to understand just the power of physical space and how much people are cued and influenced and perform their behaviors as a result of the environment that they're in. To give you a quick example, we're sitting here in Amsterdam at the moment, and our environment is very different to a lot of other places. We have a massive cycling culture. We have a city set up in a very particular way, and everyone behaves in response to the environment in some quite clear ways. And I think as an architect, if you're working in architecture, you really need to understand how much influence you can have over people's everyday behavior and how they decide to do things and how they even see themselves as a person, depending on the size of the project, of course. But I think the key thing is to understand just how much of an impact you can have on behavior and experience just by changing the environments. And then using that as a starting point and essentially saying, what do I want people to do? How do I want them to behave? Or more specifically, not you, but how would these people in their ideal self, if they could choose to live their lives in any particular way, how can we facilitate for this for them? How can we help them to be as healthy, as happy, as engaged, in a workplace, for example, as they possibly can be? And if we start from that position, I think that's a good starting point.
Very good. And Frans, from your experience, what are the fundamental connections that you see between the architecture practice and human psychology?
It's a very broad topic, of course, and we can start in the smallest detail and we can start on the highest level, and that's actually what we are also doing in UNStudio with collaboration with Ben and his colleagues. We're trying to figure out how people behave in a bigger environment, like an infrastructural environment. We all know, as an example, just to get a feel of what we're trying, how it is to step out of the train and to orient yourself and decide which direction you're going to walk or how you're going to get to the next train stop that would bring you further into the city. So if you talk about infrastructural nodes, there is a particular way of trying to let people orient themselves and different profiles, different means that will guide that. And you can also imagine a very clear example. If you are studying and you're sitting in a school class from early morning until late in the afternoon with a break maybe, it happens less often, of course, because people study more at home, but there you have the same experience. How can you enhance the focus that you need to keep on studying, or how can you consciously break that focus to let people really relax before they go into the next session? And all of this can be modeled and modified by how you create the architectural environment around it for a class on itself, if it concerns the school, but also for the individual.
Yeah.
Because everybody has a certain profile and a certain sensitivity, like Ben also says, and we can actually explore that. But we're by far not there, but it seems that we can do so much for people individually also.
It's good to be aware of it, right? That we can work on it.
Yes.
And let's say you are about to start the design process of a novel project. Do you have any expectations of how people will or should experience / behave in the space?
Yes, of course, because we're experienced architects and we do this already for, you could say, tens and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So we learn from each other, architects and designers and urbanists. But we know that there is much more behind it. So we're also trying to see what kind of new tools can we utilize to get a grip from the start on how spatial environment is going to be utilized and feels for people. And maybe one example, again, just to make it more rational, we do a lot of research on people flow, agency-based modeling, in which we experiment how do people actually move from one point of space to another point of space, and how do they interact with the obstacles or with the experience that is on their way through that space.
Yeah.
And with that, you can actually anticipate a little bit better how you would design that space for people.
Yeah. Let's say also using these tools, how confident are you that your design interventions will generate the desired experiences and behaviors? Let's say you go on a project and you say, oh, I want people to behave this way or have this experience. Now you touch upon the tools that we have that will help us to anticipate or predict how humans might or users might behave in the space. How confident are you at this point in time that you can predict human behavior well?
That's a very good question. And of course, we're not that far yet that we can really prove what we're trying to achieve, because for UNStudio, this method of utilizing new tools and creating a different type of environment is something new. We can only say that by having done by now a couple of projects which are big scale, we can much better guess what could be impacts that we can do based on the observations that we do, because that's what we start with, observation in real life, surveys. Ben will talk, I think, a little bit about this. That brings us data, and creating data insight, seeing what could be the conclusions or first conclusions of having that data for us, brings you to insight, and that insight has to be tested in a post-occupancy way. And only when we can start to test that by doing again surveys, we can actually start proving what we're doing. Yeah. And that's taken from my profession of architecture and urbanism. And maybe Ben can talk a little bit more from his science approach, if there's other ways actually to prove it before we have the physical environment.
Yeah. Before we come to you, Ben, I think this is great that you bring up that we have to actually do some measurement on what people do if we want them to behave in a certain way. Because I would like to throw in an example project, which was actually very successful from a designer's point of view. It's the Seattle Public Library, which opened in 2004. And the project won several awards. It's a very well-designed building. Yet people are experiencing wayfinding problems. And the leading architect on the project, who is Joshua Prince Ramis, so he's the founding principal of Rex, he said the following quote: "The wayfinding wasn't done perfectly, to put it kindly. When you understand the building, it is very simple, just a series of boxes. But what we didn't understand is, to the uninitiated person, someone not an architect or library stuffer, it can be complex if they don't understand that. What we thought is blatantly obvious isn't." And I think he's touching exactly upon this problem, that sometimes the intuition of a designer can clash with how people actually experience a space or behave accordingly. And let's dive into cognitive research, how we can enhance what Frans already touched upon, that we do measurement into cognition to be able to more safely predict human behavior. So, Ben, what do you think are technologies or research approaches that should belong to an architect's toolset and able to anticipate behaviors and experiences better?
Yeah, excellent question. I think there's many levels of data collection tools that you can use. So everyone will be familiar with something like surveying or just qualitative questions. This is just where someone goes through a space and you ask them, how did you experience that? And this is already a third person perspective in that it's not the designer who's making the reflection, they're asking someone else to make a reflection. So this is something that gets used often in user experience. And then you just say, how did you experience the space? And this can be open-ended. Then you go one level further, and then you might put together a questionnaire that you validated, and you say, okay, how does this person experience the space? But now you want to be able to compare that objectively between different people and between different situations. So you need some sort of standardized scale. That's one level up. And then you can take this further, going past these methods to something like eye tracking or biodata. You can see a lot of people have watches now that do tracking of various types of biodata. You have heart rate, which can be translated to heart rate variability, which can be used as a stress metric. You have galvanic skin response, which gives you an indication of autonomic arousal, which tells you whether you're in a high intensity emotional state or a low intensity emotional state. This can all be tracked. And eye tracking we'll talk a little bit more about as we go onwards. And then you can take this even further. Not that we haven't done this in this context as of yet, but you have tools like neuroimaging, where you have things like EEG, you have functional magnetic resonance imaging, you have all sorts of different neuroimaging tools that offer you an even deeper understanding, but of course at a much more abstract level that's harder to interpret. But this is certainly something, more expensive. But this is something we could be seeing in the future, depending on the projects. So there's multiple levels to this, and they each have benefits. It's not to say that surveying is not a good approach. It actually does have a lot of benefits because it's much closer to how people feel about their experience. But these days we have so many tools to try to understand how people experience the world around them, and then specifically to understand how a particular design of an architectural design, how that might compare to other designs, and to do this in a way that suddenly becomes quite objective. It really poses quite an interesting possibility, I think.
Yeah. Maybe we can even give our audience a little insight into one of the technologies.
Yes,
I think you brought something for us today.
So what we're going to look at here, these are some eye tracking glasses. You maybe have seen eye tracking glasses before. There's different variations of eye tracking, sometimes static, where it just sits in front of a computer and it tracks your eyes from that direction. And sometimes a more dynamic eye tracking, such as this one.
Looking great.
Much appreciated. So what you see here, this is eye tracking glasses. They look very much like as if they were normal glasses, as you can see. And I'm just going to turn on the device. And you essentially will just start to record from... You can essentially start to record, and there's a recording that's coming directly from this camera over here. And then there's little sensors on the side of these glasses that are essentially tracking where my pupils are looking at any given moment. So you have all this space in your visual field. If you had, for example, a GoPro attached to you, it just looks like you can see all of it. But it's not true at all. You are focusing on one little point of the scene at any given time. And so what these glasses do is they allow us to see exactly where attention is allocated at any given time. This can help you to determine things like, for example, is a person seeing a sign in a wayfinding context or something like this? And so this is essentially how these eye tracking glasses work, and it's already been used in 2 projects so far with some really interesting results.
And interesting results, not only for us as architects, but also for our clients that are, in our case, part of a bigger institution or a part of a city environment, because they have to answer what we're going to try to achieve with these projects in a bigger realm of the community. And if we can help them with this more scientific approach in which we can really give them insight how people actually move through public life, in a sense, in the case of infrastructure, means that they have a much easier time by explaining why they would take certain measurements, why they would invest in certain aspects of urbanism for the community, because we see that there is a necessity out of the observation of what we did. And by far we're not there yet, but it's so promising that also our client says, let's do more experimentation. Let's try to observe more and learn from it and actually take the right measurements from that and validate the design. So we can also see what we do, that it's really implemented in the product that we're going to deliver.
Yeah. Good
It
point.
also, it might be worth mentioning, none of these tools that we're talking about, whether it's something like eye tracking or something like neuroimaging methods, none of them are a perfect window into conscious experience or cognition. We can't see into people's minds necessarily, but it's
And
really
people's minds are very complex.
they are in a way that science is not yet fully disentangled, and not even close. But what this does do is it gives us a deeper level of data than we already have. We're at when we're trying to design something, we always working with incomplete data to some extent. And what I think these tools do is just gives us the opportunity to take one step further to understanding. Even though it's not perfect, it's still another step along the way to creating as good designs and as good architecture as possible.
Yeah, it's great that you bring that up, because I was just about to throw in how confident or faithful we can even be in these tools, since human cognition is super complex and even leaves experts in the field sometimes puzzled, and it's not always easy to measure. So I think it would be too optimistic and too optimistic to say we can measure everything. But as you say, it's definitely a step into the right direction, because we can gain a deeper understanding. And just as research into cognition is evolving, we can implement it more and more in the practice, I think.
Yeah, and we as architects and urbanists, of course, we also learn on the way. For me personally, as an architect, is the fact that we are all aware of how we behave in public life. And of course, translating that into language is always difficult, and it's also dependent on the moment that you ask me, so how do you feel on a certain location? It depends on my mood and my emotion at that moment, or my distractions that I have around me. Yeah. My answer will be dependent on that. That's why I think the tools that Ben is talking about, among that the glasses, they give you at least a kind of a rational insight. Yeah. So the tool is maybe neutralizing that kind of emotion that we all have about our own explanation of what the environment means. And I think, especially in the US, where we do these exercises, we're also talking about real differences of different groups of people. And I don't mean profiles like color or culture, but more about class. There is classes that utilize mobility more because they cannot afford to drive a car, while there's people that drive a car that wouldn't think about ever taking the bus or the light rail in a city. And we want to overcome this because we know in New York, but especially here in Europe, it's so common part of city environment. And how do we make sure that both groups or all groups are actually taken care of in their perception and in their experience of transit?
Yeah, I think it's super good. And as we saw with the glasses, it gives you a first-person perspective, which if you observe something, you cannot see, right? It's a third-person perspective. So I think this already generates a new level of insight, which can help, especially in answering the questions that you just touched upon. And Frans, you're going to work more in the US as you're leading the new office in Austin, Texas. How are you planning to implement all your ideas more with the clients? Do you think they're open? Are they interested in seeing these technologies? And is there, let's say, a platform for what we were talking about, implementing the cognitive research in your projects and your future projects in the US?
Yeah, until now, we actually received very enthusiastic responses of the clients that we work with in the US, and particularly the clients that are more public-facing. We have a fantastic project in Austin, which is the light rail implementation, which is an implementation throughout the city in which we actually changed the city of Austin But we also have a fabulous project in Washington, D.C., where we work for Georgetown University in a downtown campus. We do these projects for both clients in a collaboration with a bigger team. And the expertise that we as UNStudio can bring in our collaboration, of course, with likes of Benjamin, means that we can open kind of the toolbox that we can offer our client and actually make the conceptual approach, how we think about these transformations of both a downtown area and a whole city, how they can adapt much better to what the community actually is asking for and what they need. But it does also mean that the client has to be aware of that and has to invest in getting to know what the community actually wants from them. And in both cases they are, so that's super exciting.
Yeah.
In America, we feel that democracy is, although maybe on the surface it looks very complex, it's very present in the cities. People are allowed or are asked to really engage in deciding where a city is heading for. And if we can prove a little bit better that we go into a certain direction, it makes life more interesting for everybody and much more appealing.
Well, Frans, we're already excited to see what you're going to do in the US. Sure, it's going to be great. Do you actually both have a project in mind where you say designers did a fantastic job in terms of human-centric design?
Oh,
fantastic is a big word.
I have a small example. It's not quite as related to what I've been outlining here from the approaches, but it was something that I found really fascinating. I think it was at Ohio State University. There was at some point they had to decide how to arrange the paths on a grass field. Essentially, they wanted to know how to pave essentially roads through this grass field on their university campus. And instead of deciding, okay, we're going to start by, we as the architects, we've decided this is where the path's going to be. Instead, the architect decided we would just leave it open until some point at which enough people had walked through and created their own paths through this lawn, and then would base the official path off this naturally occurring walking, basically. So starting with what do the people actually want to, where are they trying to go, what is the most convenient method, what would they do in the most optimal condition, and then the architect came in and said, based on this, then we're going to create the design. So this is quite an interesting approach, but this is something you can start to move a little bit more towards, I think, if you start thinking, what does the person want who's going to be the end user? Like, how do they actually want to use this space? And I think, these tools in some way allow us to get to this point a little bit, but this was just something that I found really interesting and quite creative.
And again, a great example of using measurement of what people actually do.
Exactly.
Yeah. Frans, what about you? What's
this is a really
project?
nice example. For me, it's very difficult because I feel that it's still in its starting stage. What I think are really good examples of where you can see that the architect or the people that worked on it thought about human behavior is good airports. Changi Airport in Singapore, I think also Schiphol and Charles de Gaulle are airports where there's a lot of attention for how people orient and find their way throughout. And you can only develop that with the right insight in how people actually behave, bigger groups, but also individuals. We did the same, as Ben told you, in LAX, where we contributed to the team that worked on the gateway and the new terminal with this insight of how people might behave and what can you do with that insight on the meaning of the different sequence of moving through that space. And our own airport in Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, Kutaisi, we definitely made sure that the sequence of space and the way we experience them in tactility, audio, light, perception, colors, makes that there is a much more comfortable way of being processed from being a visitor to being a traveler on the other side of customs and security.
I think it's a great example, airports, because I think it's very obvious how different an experience can be depending on the type of airport that you're in. And I think Changi examples are an excellent example of an airport that really produces a very different experience. Perhaps you feel a little bit more relaxed. There's very different color palettes to most airports that I've experienced, and it promotes more of a feeling of relaxation. Of course, I'm speculating here based on personal experience. You'd have to measure this if you really wanted to find out. But certainly, you have a lot of ability to impact how people are going to experience their time in an airport, which can often be quite a long time and leave quite a mark on an impression on people's memory of an experience. So I think it's a really interesting use case.
Yeah, I think it's a great transition to what I wanted to touch upon now that we're reaching the end of our episode, future speculations. Let's say cognitive design is going to boom in the near future. Do you think critics could say that at some point we could reach a point where it's becoming manipulative?
Yes, of course. Of course, because it depends how we see the benefit of utilizing such science as behavioral and experience science. It's something that we have to be aware of, that of course it can be misused, or we can misuse it also. But I think we as architects, we're always out there for the benefit of the people that are utilizing the environment that we create. And doing more research on how they utilize it, and if they feel comfortable utilizing it, or even if they're aware of the fact that they utilize it, because that's also a question that you can ask people, of course. There's a lot of unconscious, more intuitive movement through space that we cannot really ask people, but we can measure it, of course. And manipulation, if you want to call it like that, is part of that, because that's what we do, of course. When we put a sign in front of people to say, go to the left, we manipulate people to go to the left, because that's obviously where we or the client wants them to move to. But it's, I think, with the measures that we're talking about and that we're developing now, it's not so in your face. We still manipulate, but we gently manipulate, I would say, to make it softer.
And with good intentions.
I think it's also important to think about the fact that we are constantly being cued by our environment, regardless of whether it was intentionally designed by an architect or not. Just the things we see on our commute, the kind of stores we pass, the types of transport people are using, all sorts of things in our daily environment are constantly cueing us. Like, we're responding all the time, regardless, to our environments. And what architects are trying to do more and more successfully as they're able to get more and more data about how to influence people, is they're trying to do this in a way that is in the benefit of the people who are using the space. And so long as this remains the priority, I think it could be moving in a positive direction in this case. But of course, it's a serious consideration to consider. Like, as we get better and better at understanding how people experience things, and we understand how we can nudge them or influence them in subtle ways, becomes a big responsibility on architects and designers to be responsible and to have the best interests of their clients in mind. But
And maybe just one example out of our work field and on the ground. If you want your client, because that's what we first need, we want our client to ask for this. We don't want to say, client, you should really do it and somehow pay for it. Clients themselves need to see the benefit of that. So that's what we have to be the ambassador of. And a nice example for us doing the work in Austin, trying to anticipate on what better environment we can create. If we talk about dynamics on an urban environment, how people move about, how people feel safe. People feel safe when there's people on the street, when there's people on the sidewalk. And there's people on the sidewalk when there's enough to do on the sidewalk, when there is a curation of the sidewalk. And one of the parts of curation on the sidewalk is shops, is retail, F&B. So if we advise a client that there should be more dynamics on the sidewalk to provide a better backdrop for people as a big group concerning safety, comfort, there is an incentive for them that is economic to add to the programming on the street. And if we can tell them better with our observations what that programming should be, it's also a better opportunity for the local economy, so you will. So if you connect it to direct, let's say, economics, income, value, not only value for us as human beings that we're better taken care of, but also for the value of the city as a whole, as a network, there is an incentive to really take this into acceleration.
Yeah, good point. And as a last question, in what way do you think that cognition will especially become relevant or needed in architecture projects in the coming future?
Like I said, I think that for us, these public-facing projects are the ones where it's really beneficial. And that can be a school as an institution. It can also be infrastructure nodes, station areas, light rail, airports, of course. But I think also in the bigger mixed-use projects that we do all over the world, which also knows a public facing and more anchoring in the city aspect, it's evident that it brings a lot of insight in betterment.
For you, Ben?
Yeah, I think there's a few different time frames at which I see influence or which I see possibilities. I see in the short term, I think there's a lot of possibility to continue to essentially really take into account the perspective of the end user and understand them better. And we're still in the early stages of this process, but I think there's a lot of value to be gained already by starting to understand the end user's experience through cognitive methods already. But a little bit looking into the future, I think there's also a lot of possibility. There's some tools, for example, agent-based models, which were mentioned a little bit earlier. And at the moment, they're mostly used for flow dynamics. They're mostly used to understand capacities. For example, at a metro station is a constant is a common usage case. But as these technologies improve, these agent-based models, by the way, they allow you to simulate how people would move through a space if they were acting like rational, normal agents, and eventually you can make this more valid by using data from real people to simulate how real people move around, and then you can use those agents to simulate in new architectural environments before they've even been built. So, say you've designed a new hospital or something, and then you can walk these agents through. They're not real people. It's just a simulation on a computer, and they can give you insights into how you can change your design. Now, this is all before a single brick has been laid. This is all in the theoretical realm. Now, we can already do this, but in the future, it's possible that these agents could become smarter and could start to tell us even more about how the expected experience is likely to be in a space. And we're looking into the future now, but I can see situations where you can do a lot of you can really understand a lot about how the experience will evolve, and then you can make changes before building. So this is
Super
what I
promising.
see the future of this interaction could be.
Yeah, super exciting.
Yeah.
Well, Frans and Ben, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and expertise on this episode today.
Thank you.
We're definitely excited to see novel breakthroughs harnessing insights into cognition in the coming future. And we hope that we could spark your enthusiasm for cognitive design. Thank you all for tuning in. And please make sure to follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss out on any of our episodes. And please put in the comments any questions that you have about data acquisition, the tools, the research, and we would be very happy to record a second session of this topic to respond to all your questions. We'll see you next time on UNS Talks. Ciao.